Hello, the Empire of Mali flourished during the European Middle Ages. It was larger than any empire in West Africa before or since, and drew its power from what were then the largest gold mines in the world. Europeans knew relatively little of Mali, relying on Arab and Berber traders to bring the gold north over the Sahara. There was closer contact between Mali and Muslim culture, as Mali's rulers converted to Islam. When the 10th emperor, Mansa Musa, made the pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century, he brought so much gold he lowered its value in Cairo, sometimes being called the richest man the world has ever known. Knowledge of Mali's empire today, though, is hard won. Victorian explorers assumed its physical remains, like the Great Mosque of Djenné, were signs of Arab settlement. What we know now has been pieced together from archaeology, from epic poems, and from the writings of Islamic scholars and geographers. With me to discuss the Empire of Mali are Amira Bennison, reader in the History of Culture of the Maghrib at the University of Cambridge; Kevin MacDonald, Professor of African Archaeology and Chair of the African Studies Programme at University College London; and Rodet, Senior Lecturer in the History of Africa at SOAS. Amira Bennison, who are the people living in the North Africa in this time, from the 12th to the 16th centuries?
In the 12th century, northern Africa was inhabited by peoples who we collectively call the Berbers. There'd also been a fair degree of Arab settlement, but mostly in towns. So when we're talking about the majority of the inhabitants of North Africa, we are talking about Berber populations from what's now Libya across through Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. And in the 12th century, a lot of North Africa was actually ruled by the Almohad Empire, which was an empire founded by Berbers from the High Atlas Mountain in what's now southern Morocco.
Was there any sense they had settlements, the Berbers? They weren't nomadic?
The Berbers is a catch-all term for the entire population. So they were a tribal people for the most part, but some of them were sedentary villagers, some of them were nomads. Those who lived on the edge of the Sahara were often nomadic just because of the environment in which they lived. And a fair number of them were the so-called Melethamun, the veiled Berbers of the desert, who were very involved in the trade across the Sahara and connecting North Africa to West Africa.
So let's talk about that, because that's the most important thing really that we're getting at here. What was leading them to make the difficult journey across the Sahara to this region of West Africa, Empire of Mali, as we're going to come to know it?
Well, this is an interesting topic, and obviously gold is the most glamorous commodity, which was transported backwards and forwards across the desert.
Can you give us some idea of the gold? Because it's the biggest gold provider until South Africa comes along and America comes along. The biggest gold provider in the world by far. But can you be better than by far?
I'm not sure that I can be better than by far, actually. We're talking about medieval history here, so it is very difficult to pinpoint amounts. But the majority of the gold currency in North Africa from the 11th century on came from West Africa. So if you think of the gold currency of the Almoravid Empire in the 11th century, which became generalised throughout the Mediterranean, that was all West African gold. So it was a very substantial proportion of gold coming into Northern Africa, moving across to the Middle East, and also then filtering up to Europe.
Across the Mediterranean into Europe.
Yes.
And so most of these journeys across the Sahara, which has been quite risky, were to get the gold.
Well, gold is only one element in the trade. The trade actually probably starts as a more routine kind of trade. One of the items that was required in West Africa was salt. And you could dig rock salt from mines in the Sahara Desert, located at places like Aulil or Tagaza. And it was because the West Africans wanted the salt that they were exchanging it for gold. Slaves is another commodity moving across the Sahara. And the Berbers themselves also, on a much more mundane level, needed grain, because they lived in an environment where they lived primarily off animal products, dairy products and meat, so they needed grain. So there are a number of different commodities in the trade, but gold is a very important one of those commodities.
So this is a quite busy and productive, and in looking back at it in its own way, an efficient series of trade routes between North Africa across the desert to West Africa.
Yes, it's a slowly building trade route. It probably did exist in pre-Islamic times, but it flourishes particularly from the 8th and the 9th century onwards, directed by various Berber tribes, many of whom follow the Kharijite sect of Islam, and they develop these routes, which do indeed become really quite busy, particularly by the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, and then into the 14th, where they seem to be sort of burgeoning with huge caravans moving backwards and forwards, not just to North Africa, but also to to Egypt, which is moving in towards the Middle East.
Kevin MacDonald, Sundiata is identified as the first emperor of Mali from about 1235 AD. Can you tell us something about him?
Well, Sundiata was a heroic figure. He was at once a mythic and historic figure. You could sort of see him as the West African equivalent of King Arthur, or something like that. In terms of historical information, the first evidence that we have is from about 100 years after his death, or a little bit more than that, from Ibn Khaldun, who tells us basically just three things, well, maybe four. First, that he was the greatest king of Mali. Second, that he conquered Soso, which was a kingdom which existed before Mali. Third, that he reigned for 25 years. And then, of course, it gives his name, which he gives as Mari Jata, which means, well, Mari means royal or king, and Jata derives from the word lion. So in that sense, Sundiata is the original Lion King. But also, of course, he's known as Sundiata, and in that case, the Sun is a diminutive of his mother's name, Sugalon.
Now, there's the epic of Sundiata. Can you give us a brief resume of an epic? Is that possible? I'm sure it is.
It's something that could be performed over an entire day. So it consists of 4 story cycles. The first is about his mother, who is a woman who's also known as the Buffalo Woman, who is humpbacked and probably past childbearing age, but who prophecy says will bear the greatest of all kings. And she is brought by 2 hunters back to the king of a kingdom called Kuri, also known as Mandan, and the king agrees to take her as one of his wives, and she has a child, Sundiata. And so that takes us to the second cycle of all of this, which is Sundiata's youth. He is born disabled, he can't walk, he refuses to speak, and it's only really through the grief of his mother over all of this sort of disappointment that he stands heroically with the help of an iron rod, and then grows on to have great strength, enough to uproot a baobab tree, and if you know what a baobab tree is, it's the largest of West African trees, and offer its leaves to his mother. He becomes a great hunter and a heroic figure in this kingdom. But this leads to a lot of jealousy. So that takes us to the third part of all of this, where he is forced to go into exile because of, after the death of his father, for fear that he will be murdered. He succeeds in his exile. He becomes almost the adopted son of a king of another kingdom, Mema, when he is called back home by the fact that his ancestral kingdom has been taken over by this evil sorceress figure known as Sumanguru, who he comes back, learns the magical weakness of, and conquers at the Battle of Karina, becoming the first emperor of Mali.
And then goes on to become the great emperor and extends the empire massively. How much of this do you believe to be true?
The core that Sundiata existed, that he was the first emperor, I believe to be true. The elements of the Sundiata legend or epic could have been combined from many different traditional tales. But I think, there are elements of truth, and in terms of place names in the different bits of this epic as related, there are also interesting hints as to where we might seek for material evidence.
We might come back to evidence later. In fact, we certainly come back to evidence later. Mary Rodet, it's said that Sundiata created what's known as the Magna Carta of Mali. What's this?
Well, it's what has been found out recently. It's actually a text which is also called Kuru Kanfuga, but it's rather a recent discovery.
What do you mean by recent?
Well, the text was written, put down on as a script in the late 1990s officially for the first time. You have traces of this text, not really a text, but the fact that Sundiata, it's claimed in the epic that Sundiata organized a great assembly following the Battle of Krina, and when he won to organize the empire. You have traces of these facts in one of the first written epic written by Jibril Tamsianian, who is a Guinean scholar in the 60s. But it's really in the 90s that it came to the form we know today, which became then in 2009 World Heritage Intangible.
What does it do? The form it is today, what does it say? Scholars from Mali and Guinea claim it's a kind of constitution of a sort, as you said, a sort of Magna Carta dating back to the medieval times. So they say it's Magna Carta. I'm just repeating what they say.
Yeah.
What sort of things does it say though in the detail? Can you give us 2 or 3 clauses?
It organizes the different clans in the empire, social relations, and the roles of the different clans and castes in the empire. Some scholars claim that it's a kind of human rights charter, but it's a disputed text actually, and some scholars even claim it might be invention of tradition or reinvention, and that it's a combination of several traditions and which was made a text at a very late stage.
When is it claimed that it was originally written?
Well, there is also dispute about the date, actually.
Can you give the listeners some idea of what's going on here?
So the text as intangible heritage has been registered for 1236. But other scholars, Malian scholars, claim that there was a preceding text, a hunter horse, which is called the Mande Charter.
So even before 1236?
Yeah, a few days before, 1222. But it's kind of interesting that they have so certain dates, because when we know about the process of retrieving medieval history, how it is hard to find really detailed dates, it's interesting that you have nowadays scholars from Mali and Guinea who are so sure about these certain dates.
Well, how did they get to 1236? That's a very specific date. Can they carve and test the paper, or is there any other corroborating record? Where does that date come from?
It comes from when Sundiata won the Battle of Krina, and following the battle, it's when he organizes big assembly with all the clans and try to organize the empire, basically. So it's a date we are not sure exactly where it comes from, but it's based mainly on oral traditions.
Thank you. Amira, how far and how quickly did Islam spread into the land controlled by Sundiata? It spread by trade, the Berbers brought it, but how fast and when and what happened?
Well, that's a very long story that predates the era of Sundiata himself. The Empire of Mali was preceded by the Empire of Ghana, and there were certainly Islamic influences within Ghana. And this is ancient Ghana, so it's not located in the same place as the modern country of Ghana. It's much further north in the Sahara, the southern Sahara. And Islam was really conveyed by the traders. Berber traders from North Africa began to cross the Sahara for trading purposes. They were allowed to establish settlements in sub-Saharan African towns as trading colonies. And by those means, their knowledge, their learning, their religion began to sort of percolate slightly among the pagan population.
It wasn't a particularly proselytizing religion, Islam, but we know that various people, the rulers, took it up. Why did they take it up?
It's difficult to say exactly why people took up Islam. It had a certain appeal as a religion with writing. Arabic was the language used by the Berber traders, and obviously it's a written language. So it is a machine for literacy, if you like. So it's appealing in that sense. And you do see Muslims who are literate and can write, who begin to be employed by pagan kings as scribes, as advisors through their literacy. It also has a quite established set of rules for trading and for fair contracts, which would also make it appealing for merchants, possibly.
Because the generality of faiths at that time were animistic, weren't they?
Yes, West Africa is an area we would call pagan in inverted commas, with animist beliefs of various kinds, ancestor cults, which continue to be very important all through this period. And although Islam spreads, and the feature perhaps we should point out for Mali is that it's with the Malian emperors that you begin to see important rulers converting to Islam as well.
Kevin MacDonald, after achieved the heroic task of reduced epic, what can you give us some idea of the range of the empire in the time of its greatness? Right.
As it grew, it didn't reach its apogee under Sanjata. It reached its apogee later. One could say under Mansa Musa, who we'll talk about later.
Can you give us some idea of dates?
By around 1300, 1320, that sort of time. This is when Mali is at its height, and it stretches from the Atlantic, what is now Senegal, all the way past the Niger Bend, and so what would be the border today between Mali and Niger, say. And as it expands in this, as it sort of exists in this large 2,000-kilometer swathe, east to west.
So Western Europe size.
Yes, it's also cutting across a number of different layers of environment. So in the north, obviously, you have the Sahara, and then you have these sort of semi-arid grasslands, and the southern edge of Mali would be just in sort of the savanna forest area.
Do we know how that was organised, Kevin? Was it organised? Was it rule by sending the troops in, and what sort of troops were there, or was it Confederates? What happened?
There's a combination, I think. I mean, we're still reconstructing this, but I think, as usual, there's always a core of empire. And here you have governors, regional governors, who are referred to as Massa, who could be installed in key towns to govern regions and levy tribute or taxes. And this would be at the core of Mali. But abutting Mali all the way around are all of these semi-autonomous kingdoms who owe their loyalty and pay tribute to the center, and they're part of the empire. They're sort of sub-kings to the emperor. So this could include things, as we'll talk about later, like Songhai, which is at the eastern extent of Mali.
So it's either they send their man in to collect the taxes, and that's the key thing, they want the taxes, or they make associations, leave the people more or less as they are, and let them collect the taxes, but they want tributes paid to them.
Absolutely, and of course, if things go wrong, then you send in the army.
What sort of army was it?
Well, it's supposed to be an army that would have included an element of cavalry and also archers. These would be relatively small armies, I think, by modern standards, thousands or at most tens of thousands.
But much the same as armies in medieval Europe, then, in that sense, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mary Rodet, what reports are Arabic writers bringing back from Mali, and when are they reporting back?
Well, the first Arabic writers to just mention this part of West Africa date back to the 8th and 10th century, so describing a few towns of the Ghana Empire, but most of them never went there. The very first Arabic writer who went to West Africa at the time of the Mali Empire is Ibn Battuta, who spent almost 3 months in the capital city of Mali in between 1352 and 1353.
So he's within touch of the great days, isn't he?
Yeah, it's just after Sundiata's death. It's at the time of Mansa Suleiman, who is the follower even of Mansa Musa. So he describes at length in his writing the customs, the rituals, and how he met the king, and his connection with local Arabic traders and counselors at the court. But he also comes with his own biases from North Africa as an Arabic Muslim. And what he's very interested in is to what extent the people of Mali follow Arabic rules and the Muslim, the Islamic religion. So it's a way he approaches mostly these people, and so he goes at length in praising some parts of their customs as long as they are close to the way Islam is performed in North Africa, but at the same time criticizing very heavily what he considers pagan rituals.
Do you have an impression when you read that this is a rich, well-developed, civilized society?
Well, as I said, it's the way the document is written is full of biases. So it's hard to know what is really historical facts, what is tangible, but at the same time, there is a kind of political purpose behind this text, because it's for Ibn Battuta, to my knowledge, it was important to prove the extent to what Islam was performed outside North Africa, and to prove that Islam was almost as strong outside North Africa as it was in North Africa at the time.
I see. Amira, Bennison.
Yes, I mean, I just wanted to add to that, really, that, I mean, one of the things that Ibn Battuta picks up on in terms of sort of the organisation is the very efficient organisation of justice within the parts of Mali through which he travels, and the fact that people do get redress from wrongs, and that is mediated through the representatives of the emperor of Mali. So he does see an organisation and a structure and a developed empire.
Let's move on to Mansa Musa, this supposed to be the richest man in the world and all that stuff. The 10th emperor, he made a Hajj, a pilgrimage to Mecca in the 1320s. Can you tell us something about that and what impression it had? Because
Yes.
that was widely reported. There were maps of him all over the place. So we were on rather more solid ground here.
Yeah, we're on slightly more solid ground with the pilgrimage of Mansa Musa in 1324 to 5. Once West Africans started to convert to Islam, to perform the pilgrimage was something increasing numbers wanted to do. And there are a number of emperors who appear to have made the pilgrimage, but by far the most famous is Mansa Musa. He travelled across the desert, reputedly with a huge caravan of slaves, servants, 80 to 100 loads of gold. And he made his way through to Egypt, which was ruled by the Mamluks at that time, and made a great impression. We don't have eyewitness reports as such, but we have the account written by Al-Umari, which was based on speaking to people who had seen Mansa Musa and his entourage in Cairo. And this is, of course, the phase where the flooding of the Egyptian market with gold is cited as a possible reason for the depreciation in the metal's value in the Middle East and Mediterranean at that moment.
So he swept on there, and he must have been can you just give us a bit more of this? Because you've got real stuff on this.
Yes, yeah. No, I mean, it's a fascinating
Do we know how many hundreds?
account.
There's 500 slaves are cited. Each one is supposed to be carrying a gold stick. Is that true? And what did he... I mean, that sort of stuff.
Let's just say numbers in medieval Arabic chronicles need to be taken with a very big pinch of salt. So I wouldn't say that 500 slaves with solid gold staffs isn't necessarily true, but obviously he had a large number of slaves with gold or gilded equipment. He also had a lot of female slaves with him. But some of the other things that were noticed relate to this idea of West Africa as actually being quite civilized. The fact that his entourage, although naive about Egypt, were very polite. They were very well dressed. They're described as sort of clean, behaving appropriately, and also being very pious. And one of the major things that Mansa Musa wanted to do during the pilgrimage appears to be to recruit religious scholars and learned personnel to take with him back to Mali.
Numbers are very difficult in all chronicles, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
From the Old Testament to maybe the chronicles of today. They're always dicey.
Yes.
Kevin, you want to come in? Kevin MacDonald.
No, one of these learned people who notionally Mansa Musa brings back with him is this Andalusian, this Spanish architect by the name of Al-Sahili. And this plugs into the story that on his return from the Hajj, on every Friday when he stopped, he would order for a mosque to be built. And there are a number of locations in Mali where it's said that there were these mosques built by Mansa Musa, including in Gao and Timbuktu and Djenne. Of course, the only one of these that's still standing is the Mosque of Djenne in Timbuktu. But the Mosque of Djenne, the current mosque, the World Heritage Site, which was built in 1907, is standing on the foundations of what might have been Mansa Musa's mosque. This is the largest mosque in Mali. Its foundation is about 75 meters by 75 meters. It's a huge structure.
So did he build all these mosques, or did they perish because of the materials that were used?
Well, mud, earthen architecture is surprisingly robust as long as you keep it replastered every year. It's possible for structures, or at least the core of structures, to endure for a long time. There are standing structures in Mali that probably date back to the 14th century.
But he didn't build one every Friday, by the look of it.
I think that might be an exaggeration.
Yes, one of them. You've mentioned Timbuktu, which is an irresistible name. It's one of the great names, isn't it, Timbuktu? Let's pass over that childhood infatuation with Timbuktu. Marie Rodet, tell us about Timbuktu. How did it develop under the empire, and why is it important?
Well, Timbuktu probably originated in the 12th century as a trade outpost. It was originally rather a temporary dwelling, but because of its strategic position at the crossroad between the Sahara and the Sahel and on the Niger River.
So it was on the edge of the desert.
Yeah,
at the south,
exactly.
And then beside a river. So it's a good trade crossing, yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it developed soon after as a main trading dwelling, permanent dwelling, attracting traders from North Africa, but also from the Sahel. And it was included in the Mali Empire from the 13th century, and it's from there that it developed slowly into what we know today of Timbuktu as a great trade and scholarly town. But it's actually following...
Why did it develop into a scholarly town?
Well, actually, it's after the Mali Empire that it really developed into a scholarly town, under the Songhai Empire, especially with Askia Mohammed, who was the second king of Songhai.
So this the Songhais who took over the
exactly.
Empire, right.
In 1468, they took over Timbuktu, and it's Soni Ali, the first king of Songhai, who took over Timbuktu, and it's from there that they, actually the following kings sponsored scholarship and mosques and probably libraries as well. And what are known as universities, like Sankore at the time, in the 16th century. And the most we know about this city as a burgeoning place of scholarship is coming from Leo Africanus, who really related in his writing the wealth of the city in the 16th century. But it was known before. Already, Ibn Battuta visited shortly Timbuktu on his way to Mali, but it was not the city, burgeoning city at the time. It was about 10,000 inhabitants. Who were under the Songhai Empire, it went up to 100,000 inhabitants probably.
10,000 for any town in those days was quite big there. But sadly, we leave Timbuktu, Amira. And how integrated was Mali becoming with a wider Islamic world in the reign of Musa?
I think as a result of the performance of pilgrimage by the Hajj, yes.
Which again, let's just go back for a second. He had a tremendous impression, and he appeared on maps, and so he literally put this place on the map because it had been very hard to get to, except for these Berber traders who were then often excluded from the town. So they kept it very secret. They were powerful people in this empire. They didn't want much known about themselves, and they succeeded in that until about now.
I think from the late 13th on into the 14th century that there is much more integration between the Muslim and non-Muslim elements of the population. And there is this interest in attracting scholars from the north, but also in sending scholars to be educated in the north. And by the north, I mean places like Morocco, which was under the Marinid dynasty. So we know there was quite a lot of intellectual traffic between Mali and its cities and Fez in Morocco, and that wasn't one-way traffic. So in addition to the mercantile traffic going backwards and forwards, which was constantly growing and greatly stimulated by Mansa Musa's spectacular pilgrimage, you also have this constant movement of scholars backwards and forwards. And West Africa in general followed the Sunni Maliki school of law, which was the same as the rest of North Africa. So it was drawing those two areas together.
Kevin MacDonald, what combination of events, we're always asking you the rather big questions, I'm afraid, what combination of events brought the empire down?
Well, Mali begins to decline from about 1450 AD onwards. It exists in some form into the 17th century, but to begin with, like so many empires, it was simply overextended. There were too many places which could become dissatisfied and could rebel, and the most important of these was the Songhai area around modern Gao, and which had a strong army, and which began a series of campaigns from 1460, striking progressively westwards and taking more and more and more of the Empire of Mali away from the empire's core.
Was this by conquest, or did peoples these different areas join in with him? And
in the Tarikhs, they talk about individual military campaigns which go in and subdue certain areas. And so at the same time, although the effect of this is a little bit later, it needs to be remembered that the Atlantic is coming into play, that the Portuguese, who have been trying to short-circuit to get around the Berber intermediaries of trade and things like gold, were trying to get south of the Sahara along the coast, and thereby to enter into a direct gold trade with the south. And in 1448, they succeed in setting up a trading base at a place called Arguim, which is in the Gulf of Argan today on the southern coast of Mauritania. And they go there beginning to try to engage in a gold trade, but unwittingly also set off the slave trade, which ultimately, although initially is very small scale and aimed at bringing captives back to Portugal as agricultural laborers or the Canary Islands, eventually becomes this transatlantic tragedy that we know about.
The Rodet, the next empire, as Kevin's mentioned, and so have all of you actually, was the Songhai, and there were and that history has begun to be written, as I understand, about the Malian Empire about that time. So what do the Songharen's histories tell us about Mali?
Well, as Kevin mentioned, there was a Tariq. Two Tariqs were written in the 17th century. The Tariq al-Sudan of al-Badi was written around 1653, 1656. And the second one was a Tariq al-Fatash of Ibn al-Muqta from 1664. And, well, these Tariq are a specific genre which was only developed at the time, and we don't have similar sources for before or after this. But they concentrate mostly on the Songhai Empire. We have some data on the Mali Empire to make connections actually between the two empires, but also it's a historiographical attempt to write a unified narrative of West Africa and West African empires at the time when actually short after the fall of Timbuktu in 1591, Timbuktu was taken over by the Almoravid. So there was this attempt by local scholars to write a long history of the region, maybe in a search of self-identity and to mark themselves as a historical entity with a long history in comparison with the new power.
Amira Bennison, to move. Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's fine.
Amira Bennison, to move forward. The Europeans, as it came in, let's put it towards the 19th century, the French, and they made a point as lots of the West European empires, blooming empires, of learning, some of them learning about the place in which they found themselves and trying to draw history of them. What did they discover and how did they interpret it about this?
I think there was a tendency among not just the British but British and French historians of this region to see the history of West Africa very much in terms of white influence from the north and the exploitation of sub-Saharan black Africa. So, for instance, there were a lot of assumptions about the foundation of towns, that this was all achieved by Berbers from the north coming south. That Islam, that literacy, that the development of more sophisticated society was all sort of something emanating from the north. But much more recent historiography is rethinking that and sort of trying to deconstruct those kind of ideas and to recognise the indigenous contribution and the fact that these empires were built by West Africans themselves and developed by them, and that often they were the more powerful partner.
And so they had, as you said earlier, they had systems of justice which were
yes,
they had
exactly, and they had their own cultures, their own ways of doing things, and it's sort of inappropriate to impose value judgments on whether those were better or worse than ideas emanating from the north.
But we're still faced with compared with this country, say, just for instance, lack of on paper written evidence. We are lush in it here, and it's rather sparse out in West Africa. So you turn to the archaeology. But what is the archaeological evidence there?
Well, initially, archaeological evidence for the apogee of Mali was relatively elusive. The French, the first French scholars in the area in the 1890s, they first thought that the center of Mali was more in central Mali, that is to say around what is the town of Ségou today. But subsequently in the 1920s, their view shifted to this place called Djenne, which is just on the Guinea side of the Mali-Guinea border, which was then trumpeted as the capital of Mali, and there were ruins there, and these were excavated in the 1960s. But those excavations showed that this was really a later capital at the end, when it was a remnant empire, probably in the 17th century. It's only been since about 2005, when fieldwork which I've been conducting with Seydou Camara from Mali has been able to discover, in fact, that there is an enormous density of ruins and settlement relating to Mali around Ségou. And in fact, probably the French in the 1890s and their initial accounts were right. And we have massive settlements around Segu. One of them, Soratomo, is the second largest known archaeological site in Mali, measuring it at about 75 hectares, which is quite substantial.
We're coming to the end now, and there's a question I'd like to ask all of you, if you could be brief, I'm sorry to say, Murray. How much reliance is now being given to oral traditions, which can you tell us about that? Because there seem to be a lot of oral traditions, and what reliance? Historians have traditionally been rather snooty about those. What about the present state of play?
Yeah, well, for example, the epic of Sundiata is still performed nowadays by the so-called griots, who are the specialists of oral tradition in Mali. It's a specific caste. They pass down the tradition from generation to generation. It's a very specialist knowledge.
So these griots are actually passing down traditions which they say come from the 13th and 14th century.
Indeed, but what is important to bear in mind when talking about oral traditions, they are performances. They are addressed to a specific audience. So most of the time, actually, they may tell you more about a current situation, because the griots, the performers, try to respond and to make their performance attractive to an audience, and there is an interaction. So they adapt their knowledge to specific political issues.
So you're rather questioning their historical reliability. What's your summary of the reliability of the oral tradition, Amira?
I think an oral tradition gives you insight into individuals who are important, as Kevin had said, perhaps allusion to some places. It also can give you a sense of the overall trajectory of a people's history, but it doesn't give you detailed, actual, factual, historical information.
But there's a certain reliability about it, don't you think?
I think there are elements within it, if combined with written texts, can take you forward, and then combined with archaeology again, you kind of begin to put a picture of some kind together.
Well, thank you very much, Amira Bennison, Mary Rodet and Kevin MacDonald. If you want to submit an idea for our programme on the 3rd of December, today is the last day to do it. Next week we'll be talking about the maths and computer science problem of P versus NP. Thanks for listening.
And the In Our Time podcast gets some extra time now, with a few minutes of bonus material from Melvyn and his guests.
So what did we leave out?
I think I'd just like to comment further about oral tradition. And
Yeah.
I think one thing that we forget is how many different versions of things that there are. There are many different versions of the Epic of Sundiata. We have one that's very popular these days, which was sort of novelized by Djenne in 1960, which has become almost sort of the orthodox version. But as there are many tens of versions of the Sundiata epic, and what's also interesting on those is the geography of the epic, where it takes place, varies depending on where it's collected. So it's this is where the place names come in, and so there is a danger. Just like, for example, with Djenne, he places the capital and the one center of Mali in Niani. He's from around that area, but if you look at other versions, they place the capitals elsewhere, and of course there were probably many different capitals and many different centers of power in Mali.
And that's the same with the genealogy of Sundiata, which is always recalled at the beginning of the epic. And you have as many, probably not as many versions of the genealogy of Sundiata as there are versions of the epics, but you have, depending on the place it was recorded and by whom it was recalled and performed, different names in the genealogy. Some genealogies insisting on one great ancestor, the first ancestor of Sundiata, as being Bilali, one of the first companions of the Prophet Muhammad, who was a black freed slave, and whose descendants will have come to West Africa and then founding kingdoms and coming down the line to Sundiata. But in some other versions of the epic, Bilali doesn't appear at all, because it tells you a lot about how Islam also plays a role in recalling the story. And as I was saying earlier in the program, depending on the audience, and the situation in which the performance takes place, the performer will try to respond to specific contemporary issues. Like at some point, Islam becomes an important issue, political and religious issue. It's when actually Bilali will come into the picture, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that's interesting picking up on that is just the balance between Islam and animistic religions within these empires, which it's difficult to be sure about. But obviously, the Islamization of West Africa is a very slow and gradual process over many centuries. And still ongoing, exactly. And, it goes, so there's still a lot of other beliefs that are very important within these empires. So even though the ruler Mansa Musa and others like him are Muslim themselves, culturally they're also embedded in a different world, which they need to respond to as well.
I meant to ask you, do we know anything about the character of Musa?
He's described
What
as
sort of
being
man he was like?
upstanding, pretty pious, very interested in religion. He seems to be interested in Arabic letters because a Sahili, who was mentioned in the programme, this individual from Granada who he meets in Cairo and he takes back to Mali, was a poet, an accomplished Arabic poet. Whether he was or wasn't involved in building, there's a much bigger question mark about whether he was involved in building mosques.
By repute.
Well, it's part of linking, making the buildings prestigious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Linking them to this Granada, the Nasrids of Granada, the Alhambra, and all these sort of imagined wonderful buildings of the Arab Islamic world.
But of course, the architecture, the Sudanic architectural style, is very different from that. It's
it
very
is.
innovative, and indeed, even copied or transformed by modern architects. You have skyscrapers, or at least very tall buildings in Bamako today, which are built in the Sudanic style or copying the Sudanic style.
Well, and that's the irony. I mean, obviously, the West Africans were building their own buildings way before this random man, Asaheli, arrived in West Africa. He's probably got nothing to do with the building, in my view.
Do you think there's going to be a sort of growing flow of information and interest in that part of the world?
Well, I guess that the fact that the Kurungan Fuga Charter is now tangible world heritage, intangible world heritage, it might even attract more potentially young scholars and interest in the region. You have also the big South African project in Timbuktu to salvage and preserve the Timbuktu manuscripts. So you have growing interest around this area.
We are interrupted for a BBC announcement here. This is Simon.